Jake Harrison shifted uncomfortably in the too small chair, trying to find a position that wouldn't leave his knees pressed against the underside of the desk. Like everything else at Zarian Prime's Galactic Academy, the furniture hadn't been designed with humans in mind. Being the only student from Earth classified as a death world due to its high gravity, atmospheric toxins, and abundance of predators made him an oddity among his alien peers. The xenobiology classroom buzzed with the soft clicks, whistles, and electronic translations of 24 different species preparing for today's lecture. To Jake's left, Vorthon, a crystalline Zixtal whose transparent body refracted light into dazzling patterns, was arranging his note-taking crystals. To his right, a Mirin from the oceanic depths of Aquarius 7 adjusted her water-breathing apparatus, the liquid in her transparent suit swirling with anxiety-induced bioluminescence. Behind him, Quindar, an insectoid whose compound eyes gleamed with collective intelligence, tapped nervous rhythms with 3 of its 6 limbs. Professor Veltar, a reptilian xenobiologist with iridescent scales and an elaborate neck frill, entered the room with an unusual spring in his step. The frill expanded, a sign of excitement Jake had learned to recognize during his first semester. Students. Veltar's translator conveyed, his actual speech a series of melodic hisses. Today's lesson deviates from our standard curriculum. Instead of holographic models, we have received special permission for a live observation. The class rippled with excitement. Even Jake found himself straightening in his uncomfortable chair. The Kitharan Shadowstalker, Veltar continued, gesturing toward a cylindrical chamber that descended from the ceiling at the front of the classroom. An apex predator from the night forests of Kithara, specially contained for observation within multiple layers of energy barriers. Jake leaned forward, fascinated. The Kitharan Shadowstalker was infamous even among humans studying xenobiology. It combined the stealth of Earth's big cats with near-sentient problem-solving abilities and adaptive camouflage. Most importantly, and the reason for the multiple containment fields, it possessed a unique ability to partially phase through solid matter during its hunting strike. The chamber illuminated, revealing what appeared at first to be simply empty space. Then Jake saw it, a living shadow shifting against the darkness, 6 eyes that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light, and the suggestion of a sinuous form that never quite held a definite shape. Observe the primary containment field, Veltar said, activating a display that showed the field's energy readings. This is a standard Valshikar barrier, capable of withstanding impacts up to... The professor's words were cut short as the container's inner door slid open, allowing the Shadowstalker into the observable chamber. A visible shudder ran through the classroom. Vorthon's crystalline body emitted a high-pitched sound as hairline fractures appeared along his surface. The Mirin's water clouded with distress hormones. Several students moved their desks backward. Jake realized he was the only one leaning forward. "Notice your reactions," Veltar said, his frill flattening slightly. "Even in a classroom, with the strongest containment fields available, your instincts respond to the predator's presence. This is an important lesson in interspecies psychology." Jake watched, entranced, as the Shadowstalker prowled the perimeter of its enclosure. Its movements were liquid grace, each step calculated and silent. The creature paused, its 6 eyes scanning the classroom in a methodical pattern that suggested it was cataloging potential threats and prey. Those eyes lingered on Jake for a moment longer than the others. "Now," Veltar continued, "I will activate a holographic prey simulation to demonstrate hunting techniques." A small, rabbit-like creature appeared in the enclosure. The Shadowstalker went completely still, its outline blurring as its camouflage adapted. Jake could barely track its movement as it circled the hologram. Approaching from the blind spot, testing angles. "Note the intelligence," Veltar commented. "It recognizes this is not actual prey, yet demonstrates the hunting pattern for educational purposes." Jake doubted that interpretation. The predator was clearly testing the hologram's responses, perhaps seeking weaknesses. When the projection changed to a larger, deer-like creature, the Shadowstalker immediately adjusted its approach, shifting to tactics better suited for larger prey. A soft alarm chimed somewhere in the classroom, Minor power fluctuation, Veltar assured them, checking a readout. The containment field remains at 98% integrity. Jake noticed the Shadow Stalker had stopped stalking the hologram. Its attention shifted to the barely perceptible flicker in the energy barrier that had occurred during the fluctuation. Professor, Jake raised his hand. The Shadow Stalker noticed the barrier fluctuation. Impossible, Veltar dismissed. The field variance was less than 2% and lasted only milliseconds. But Jake saw the creature move to the exact spot where the flicker had occurred, placing one clawed appendage against the invisible barrier. Its 6 eyes studied the energy field with unmistakable calculation. Another alarm sounded, louder this time. Veltar's frill flattened completely against his neck, a sign of concern. Campus engineering reports a problem with the primary power grid. Backup systems are engaging, but we may experience additional fluctuations. The lights dimmed momentarily, and the Shadow Stalker's attention snapped to the control panel where the barrier readings were displayed. Jake felt a chill. The creature wasn't just intelligent, it understood technology. Perhaps we should end the demonstration early, suggested a tremulous voice from the back of the room. Unnecessary, Veltar assured them, though his own voice betrayed uncertainty. The containment system has triple redundancy. Even with primary power loss, the backup systems. The classroom plunged into darkness. Red emergency lighting activated seconds later, casting the room in a bloody glow. The barrier around the Shadow Stalker flickered visibly now. Remain calm, Veltar ordered, his claws frantically working the control panel. Containment is holding at 70%. The students were anything but calm. Vorthan's crystalline body had developed deep fractures, a physical manifestation of his terror. The Mirren's gills clamped shut, her water circulation system struggling. Quindar had gone completely rigid, his hive-mind consciousness overwhelmed by fear. Only Jake remained focused, watching as the Shadow Stalker systematically tested different points of the barrier, searching for weaknesses. Barrier at 50%, Veltar announced, his translator unable to mask the panic in his voice. Security has been alerted. Remain in your seats. Jake stood up. Harrison, sit down! Veltar hissed. It's looking for the weakest point, Jake said, moving toward the front of the classroom. It knows the barrier is failing. The Shadow Stalker paused its testing, all 6 eyes turning to track Jake's movement. For a moment, Predator and human regarded each other across the failing barrier. Jake had grown up in the wilderness areas of Earth, where humans still occasionally encountered large predators. His parents, both xenobiologists themselves, had taught him to understand predator psychology. Fear was contagious. Panic was fatal. Intelligence demanded respect. Another alarm blared. Barrier at 30%, Veltar announced. Security teams are 3 minutes out. Everyone move to the emergency exit, now. No one moved. Terror had paralyzed the class. The Shadow Stalker had found its spot, a fluctuating weakness near the base of the barrier. It pressed one clawed limb against the energy field, and Jake watched in fascination as the limb seemed to become insubstantial, partially phasing through the barrier before the field pushed it back. 15%, Veltar whispered, abandoning the control panel and backing toward the exit. Harrison, come away from there. Jake stood his ground, only a few feet from the barrier. The Shadow Stalker placed its limb against the weak point again, and this time it pushed through further before being repelled. It's testing how much it needs to phase to break through, Jake observed, his voice eerily calm. Smart. The classroom door hissed open behind them. Security is here, Veltar said with relief. The barrier collapsed with a sound like shattering glass. The Shadow Stalker stepped into the classroom, its form solidifying as it moved beyond the containment field. It was larger than it had appeared inside the enclosure, easily the size of an earth tiger, but with a fluid, almost gelatinous quality to its movement. Its 6 eyes glowed in the red emergency lighting, scanning the room methodically. Students froze or cowered. Vorthan shattered into dozens of crystalline fragments. The Mirren's suit went completely opaque as she entered a defensive hibernation state. Quindar fell from his seat, disconnected from his hive mind in pure shock. Security officers appeared at the door, weapons drawn. "Clear the room!" The lead officer shouted. "We need a clear shot!" The Shadow Stalker's head swiveled toward the new threat, muscles tensing for either attack or retreat. Jake made his decision in that split second. He stepped directly between the security team and the Predator, raised himself to his full height, squared his shoulders, and locked eyes with the Shadow Stalker. He didn't move, didn't threaten, simply established his presence as something that would not flee or cower. The security team faltered, confused by the human's actions. The Shadow Stalker tilted its head, studying Jake with predatory calculation. It took a step forward, testing his resolve. Jake held his ground, maintaining eye contact with the central pair of eyes. He spread his stance slightly, making himself appear larger without making any sudden movements. The Shadow Stalker paused. It recognized something in the human's behavior, not fear, not aggression, but a calm assertion of territory. A communication between predators. "Harrison," Veltar whispered, "what are you doing?" "Establishing boundaries," Jake replied without breaking eye contact with the creature. "It's intelligent enough to understand." The Shadow Stalker took another step forward, then stopped. It recognized something in Jake that it hadn't seen in the other students, a fellow apex predator, one confident enough to stand its ground. "We have a shot," one of the security officers announced, raising his weapon. "No," Jake said firmly, not turning away from the Shadow Stalker. "You'll only provoke it. It's not attacking because it's evaluating threats." The creature's attention shifted to the armed security officers, its body tensing again. Jake made a decision. He slowly, deliberately moved to the wall panel that controlled the exterior door, an emergency exit that led to the Academy's Arboretum. He pressed his palm against the scanner, keeping his movements smooth and unhurried. The door slid open, revealing the lush vegetation of the Arboretum, an environment far more natural to the Shadow Stalker than the sterile classroom. Jake stepped aside, maintaining eye contact with the Predator but creating a clear path to freedom. The Shadow Stalker assessed the open door, then the armed security team. It made its choice, moving with liquid grace toward the exit. As it passed Jake, barely an arm's length away, it paused. Six eyes studied him one final time. In what Jake could have sworn was a gesture of acknowledgement, one predator to another. Then it was gone, disappearing into the dense foliage of the Arboretum. The security team rushed forward, but Veltar raised a hand. "Let it go. The Arboretum connects to the Wilderness Preserve. It can survive there." "That creature is a class of predatory species," the security leader protested. "Academy regulations require—" "I'm invoking research privilege," Veltar interrupted, his frill beginning to expand again. "The Shadow Stalker is now part of my ongoing xenobiology field study. Your interference would compromise valuable research." The security officer looked like he wanted to argue, but finally holstered his weapon and began organizing assistance for the traumatized students. Slowly, the classroom began to recover. Medical teams helped Vorthan reassemble his crystalline form. The Mirren's suit gradually cleared as she emerged from hibernation. Quindar twitched and then sat up as his connection to the hive mind reestablished. Professor Veltar approached Jake, who still stood by the open door to the Arboretum. "That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever witnessed." The professor said, "How did you know it wouldn't attack you?" Jake shrugged. "I didn't know for certain, but intelligent predators prefer to avoid unnecessary confrontation. It was assessing threats and escape routes, not hunting. You stood your ground when even I was ready to flee." Veltar admitted. "Is this something all humans learn?" "No," Jake said, looking out at the Arboretum where the Shadow Stalker had disappeared. "But where I grew up, understanding predator behavior was essential. Earth has its own apex predators." "Ah, yes, your Deathworld upbringing." Veltar's translator couldn't quite capture the mixture of awe and disbelief in his tone. "Perhaps you would consider giving a guest lecture on practical predator psychology. It seems there are gaps in our theoretical approach." Jake smiled for the first time since the incident began. "I'd be happy to, Professor." As they turned back to help with the classroom recovery, Jake noticed his classmates watching him with new expressions. The fear remained, but now mingled with something else: respect, curiosity, and perhaps a touch of wonder. Earth was classified as a death world not just because of its environmental hazards, but because it had produced a species that had evolved alongside intelligent predators, learning to respect them, understand them, and sometimes communicate with them in the ancient language of survival. As the xenobiology department gathered for an emergency debriefing that evening, Jake found himself surrounded by curious classmates who had never before sought his company. Their questions came in a multilingual flood, translated into a cacophony of overlapping inquiries. How did you know it wouldn't attack? Were you not afraid? Is it true humans evolved as pursuit predators? Can you teach us to stand our ground? Jake answered patiently, explaining the fine line between foolish bravery and calculated risk assessment. He described Earth's ecology, where humans had risen to dominance not through overwhelming strength or natural weapons, but through intelligence, endurance, and understanding of other species. Professor Veltar watched from across the room, his frill partially extended in thoughtful contemplation. The incident would require extensive paperwork and likely a formal review, but he couldn't deny the educational value of what had transpired. Sometimes, the most important lessons came from unexpected teachers. The Shadow Stalker, meanwhile, made its new home in the Wilderness Preserve, occasionally glimpsed by research drones but never again attempting to approach the Academy buildings. It had found its territory and, like all intelligent creatures, recognized boundaries once established. And Jake Harrison, the lone human Deathworlder, no longer felt quite so alone at Zarian Prime's Galactic Academy. The news of the Shadow Stalker incident spread quickly through the Academy, transforming from terrified whispers to enthusiastic retellings that grew more elaborate with each iteration. By the next morning, the story had reached the administrative offices, where the Academy Chancellor, a towering Lentari with feathered tendrils that sensed emotional currents, called an emergency meeting of the department heads. Professor Veltar found himself defending not only his decision to bring a live predator into the classroom, but also his choice to let it escape into the preserve. The containment failure was unforeseen. Veltar explained, his frill flattened in formal submission to the Chancellor. The power grid malfunction could not have been predicted. "And your decision to allow a Class A predatory species to roam free in our preserve?" the Chancellor asked, tendrils waving in agitation. "A research opportunity." Veltar replied, gaining confidence. "And may I add, the human student's intervention prevented what could have been a tragedy. Had security fired upon the Shadow Stalker within the confined classroom space? Dear." He left the implication hanging in the air. Everyone present could imagine the chaos that would have ensued. The Chancellor's tendrils stilled, sensing the truth in Veltar's words. "This human, Harrison, I wish to speak with him." Jake spent the morning trying to catch up on missed assignments, finding it difficult to concentrate with the constant stream of messages from classmates and even students from other departments. His comms unit chimed again, and he sighed, expecting another request for his Deathworlder wisdom. Instead, it was a formal summons to the Chancellor's office. When Jake arrived, he was surprised to find not only the Chancellor and Professor Veltar waiting, but also representatives from the Xenological Research Council, the governing body that funded much of the Academy's work. "Mr. Harrison," the Chancellor began, tendrils extending toward Jake in a gesture of respectful acknowledgement. "Your actions yesterday have created quite a stir." Jake straightened, unsure if he was being commended or reprimanded. "I apologize if I overstepped. Chancellor, I acted on instinct." "Fascinating choice of words," said one of the council members, a Thexian whose translucent skin revealed pulsing neural pathways. Instinct versus training. Which was it? Human? Jake considered the question carefully. "Both. I suppose my parents taught me to respect predators, but in the moment something more primal took over. Earth's evolutionary history is written into our responses. Precisely why we requested this meeting." The Chancellor said, "The Research Council has approved an unprecedented project, and Professor Veltar has suggested you as a key participant." Veltar's frill expanded with pride. "The Predator Understanding Initiative, a formal study of interspecies communication between intelligent predatory species, with the Shadow Stalker as our first subject. Jake blinked in surprise. You want me to... what exactly? To teach us, the Chancellor said simply, and perhaps to serve as an intermediary with our new preserve resident. Your Deathworld perspective offers insights none of us possess. That afternoon, after signing multiple liability waivers, the legal department, comprised mainly of methane-breathing juridicals, had been working overtime. Jake found himself leading a small expedition into the Wilderness Preserve. Alongside him were Professor Veltar, 2 security officers, lightly armed but instructed not to draw weapons, and a floating array of recording devices. The Shadowstalker will have established a territory by now, Jake explained as they followed a path deeper into the artificially maintained ecosystem. It's important we announce our presence rather than surprising it. Announce how? One of the security officers asked nervously. By being obvious. Jake replied, Predators are most dangerous when they feel cornered or surprised. He deliberately made noise as they walked, occasionally breaking branches or disturbing the undergrowth. The others followed his example with varying degrees of awkwardness. They reached a clearing where the foliage thinned, allowing shafts of Zerion Prime's blue-tinted sunlight to reach the ground. Jake held up a hand, signaling the group to stop. It's watching us, he said quietly. The others tensed, eyes darting to the surrounding vegetation. Where? Veltar whispered, his frill flattening instinctively. I'm not sure exactly, Jake admitted, but I can feel it. It was more intuition than anything definable, a prickling awareness that humans had developed over millennia of being both predator and prey, the sense of being watched by something intelligent and dangerous. Recording devices active. One of the technicians confirmed. Thermal imaging shows nothing. Its body temperature must match the surroundings. Jake nodded. Adaptive camouflage includes thermal regulation. Impressive. He took a deliberate step forward, separating himself slightly from the group. Then he did something that made the security officers reach for their holstered weapons. He sat down, cross-legged, in the middle of the clearing. Harrison, Veltar hissed, what are you doing? Making myself non-threatening, Jake explained calmly, and offering the Shadowstalker a choice, approach or avoid. Either way, we learned something. The minutes stretched uncomfortably. The recording devices hummed softly. One of the security officers shifted his weight from foot to foot. Then, at the edge of the clearing, the air seemed to thicken and coalesce. The Shadowstalker materialized like a nightmare taking solid form, its 6 eyes fixed unblinkingly on Jake. Remarkable, Veltar breathed, his scientific curiosity momentarily overriding his fear. It's approaching voluntarily. The Shadowstalker moved with liquid grace toward Jake, stopping about 10 feet away. It lowered its body slightly, not a predatory crouch, but a more neutral posture. Jake remained seated, maintaining eye contact but keeping his posture relaxed. It's assessing whether we're a threat, prey, or something else. He explained quietly. And what are we? One of the security officers asked, his voice tight with tension. That's what we're establishing. Jake replied, Intelligent species negotiate relationships, even predatory ones. The Shadowstalker tilted its head, eyes shifting to take in the entire group before returning to Jake. It made a soft clicking sound deep in its throat. It's communicating, Veltar said, his frill extending in excitement. Jake nodded. Possibly. Or it could be a warning. Either way, it's engaged with us. For the next hour, they remained in a strange tableau, Jake seated in the clearing, the Shadowstalker observing from its position, the research team documenting every subtle interaction. Occasionally, Jake would shift position slightly, and the Shadowstalker would respond with corresponding movements. It's mirroring, Veltar noted, establishing a communication baseline. Eventually, Jake slowly rose to his feet. The Shadowstalker tensed momentarily, then relaxed when Jake made no move toward it. I think that's enough for today. Jake said, We've established contact without threat. Next time, we can try more direct interaction. As they prepared to leave, the Shadowstalker retreated to the edge of the clearing but didn't disappear. It watched them go with what Jake could have sworn was curiosity. Fascinating, Veltar said as they walked back toward the academy buildings. In just one session, you've achieved more meaningful contact than most xenobiologists manage in months of study. It's not just me, Jake pointed out. The shadow stalker is choosing to engage. That's the key insight here. Predators aren't mindless killing machines. They make calculated decisions based on risk and reward. The following week saw a dramatic shift in Jake's academic life. His schedule was rearranged to accommodate the new research initiative. 3 mornings a week were dedicated to fieldwork with the shadow stalker, afternoons to data analysis, and evenings to a newly established seminar series, Deathworld Perspectives on Interspecies Relations. The first seminar drew so many students that it had to be moved from the standard classroom to the Academy's central amphitheater. Looking out at the sea of alien faces, Jake felt a momentary wave of imposter syndrome. "I'm not an expert," he began hesitantly. "I'm just a student who grew up on a planet that happens to be more dangerous than most." Amirin raised a fin-like appendage. "But that's precisely why your perspective is valuable. You evolved alongside predators rather than evolving away from them." Jake nodded, finding his confidence. Earth's evolutionary history is unique in that humans became apex predators not through overwhelming physical advantages, but through intelligence, tool use, and social cooperation. We understand predator psychology because, in many ways, we share it. The questions came rapidly after that, about Earth's ecology, human evolutionary psychology, and the practical applications of Deathworld wisdom to xenobiology. The most important lesson, Jake explained, is that respect doesn't equal fear. You can acknowledge a predator's power while still establishing boundaries. That's what the shadow stalker responded to. Not submission, not aggression, but mutual recognition. As the seminar series continued over the following weeks, Jake's relationship with the shadow stalker developed in unexpected ways. The creature began to recognize the research team, sometimes even approaching when they entered the preserve, rather than waiting to be found. During their 5th session, Jake tried something new. He brought along a simple puzzle box containing synthesized protein that approximated the shadow stalker's natural prey. "Are you certain this is wise?" Veltar asked as Jake placed the box in the clearing. "We need to understand its problem-solving abilities," Jake explained, "and this establishes a positive association with our presence." The shadow stalker approached the box cautiously, examining it from all angles. Its 6 eyes blinked in sequence, a behavior Jake had come to recognize as intense concentration. One clawed limb extended, pressing against different parts of the box, testing. "It's solving it methodically," Veltar observed, recording every movement. "Not simply using force." Within minutes, the shadow stalker had figured out the sliding mechanism that revealed the food. It consumed the offering quickly, then looked expectantly at Jake. "Intelligent enough to connect us with the reward," Jake said with a smile, "and to anticipate more." The puzzle boxes became progressively more complex with each session. By the 3rd week, the shadow stalker was solving configurations that would challenge most sentient species. "We may need to reconsider its classification," Veltar suggested after reviewing the data. "This level of problem-solving suggests near sentience at minimum." The implications were profound. If the shadow stalker possessed this level of intelligence, how many other species had been misclassified as merely predators? How much potential interspecies understanding had been lost to fear? These questions formed the basis of a formal research paper that Jake and Professor Veltar co-authored, titled Predator Intelligence, a Deathworld Perspective on Interspecies Communication. When it was accepted for publication in the prestigious Galactic Xenobiology Journal, the Academy administration took notice. The Chancellor called Jake to his office once again, this time with news that would change the course of his academic career. "The Xenological Research Council is impressed with your work," the Chancellor said, tendrils waving in patterns that indicated strong approval. "They've approved funding for an expanded initiative, not just the shadow stalker, but a comparative study of intelligent predator species from across the galaxy." Jake felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. "That's a significant escalation." "Indeed," the Chancellor agreed. "And they want you to lead the field research team." Me, but I'm still a student. A student with unique qualifications. The Chancellor interrupted. Your Deathworld origins provide insights none of our senior researchers possess. Professor Veltar will oversee the academic components, but the practical field methodology will be yours to develop. It was an unprecedented opportunity and responsibility. Jake thought of his parents, both xenobiologists who had encouraged his application to the Galactic Academy, despite the challenges a human would face there. They had always believed that Earth's perspective was valuable to the wider galactic community. I accept, Jake said, on one condition, that we prioritize respect and communication over containment and control. The Chancellor's tendrils rippled in what Jake had learned to recognize as amusement. After witnessing the results of conventional containment methods, I think we can all agree your approach has merit. The expanded initiative brought new species to study. A gravitic ambush predator from the heavy-gravity world Dominar, a pack-hunting aerial species from Skythera, and most challenging of all, an aquatic pursuit predator from the ocean moon Hydros. Each required Jake to adapt his methods, to understand the evolutionary pressures that had shaped these species and find common ground in their predatory nature. Some sessions ended in retreat, others in breakthrough moments of connection, but all generated valuable data about interspecies communication. The Shadowstalker, however, remained Jake's most remarkable success. By the end of the semester, he could enter the preserve alone, and the creature would approach him directly. They had developed a form of communication based on posture, movement, and mutual respect that transcended the barriers of completely different evolutionary paths. On the final day of the term, as students prepared for the break between academic sessions, Jake visited the preserve one last time. He found the Shadowstalker waiting in their usual clearing, as if it had anticipated his arrival. I'm leaving for a while, Jake said, knowing the words meant nothing to the creature but finding comfort in speaking them anyway. Research expedition to study other predators. The Shadowstalker tilted its head, 6 eyes blinking in that now familiar pattern of concentration. Jake sat in the clearing, and for the first time. The Shadowstalker approached close enough to touch. It settled on the ground beside him, not quite making contact but near enough that Jake could feel the subtle heat radiating from its body. They remained that way until the blue sun of Zarian Prime began to set. 2 predator species sharing space without fear or dominance, a silent testament to the potential for understanding across the vast evolutionary divides of the galaxy. When Jake finally rose to leave, the Shadowstalker watched him go without following. It had its territory in the preserve, and Jake had his path among the stars. But both had been changed by their encounter. As Jake walked back toward the Academy buildings, now familiar despite their alien proportions, he reflected on how far he had come from that first uncomfortable day in the too small chair. He was still the only human at Zarian Prime's Galactic Academy, still a Deathworlder among species from safer, more hospitable planets. But he was no longer an outsider. His classmates now sought his company not out of fear or curiosity about the strange human, but for his insights and friendship. Professor Veltar had become a mentor and research partner. Even the Chancellor's feathered tendrils extended in greeting whenever they passed in the Academy corridors. Earth was classified as a death world, but Jake had shown that this was not something to overcome or apologize for. It was a perspective to be valued, a source of wisdom about coexistence with the more dangerous aspects of nature. In a galaxy where most species had evolved to avoid predators, humanity's experience of evolving alongside them, and sometimes as them, offered a unique bridge of understanding. The Shadowstalker incident, which had begun as a classroom emergency, had transformed into the foundation of a new field of study, one that promised to reshape galactic understanding of intelligence, communication, and the complex web of relationships between species. And it had all started because a human student had stood his ground when a predator escaped. 6 months later, Jake Harrison stood on the observation deck of the research vessel Stellar Horizon, watching as the unfamiliar constellations of the Kitharan star system came into view. After a successful expedition studying predator species across 3 sectors, they were returning to where it all began, the Shadowstalker's homeworld. Professor Veltar joined him at the viewport, his frill partially extended in what Jake now recognized as contemplative excitement. "Having second thoughts about the field study?" the professor asked. Jake shook his head. "Not second thoughts, just appreciating how far we've come." Their research team had expanded to include specialists from a dozen worlds, each bringing unique perspectives to the Predator Understanding Initiative. The Mirren from Jake's original class had joined as an aquatic environments expert. Quindar, the insectoid, provided invaluable insights into collective intelligence patterns. Even Vorthon, despite his traumatic fracturing during the original incident, had contributed crystalline recording technology that captured sensory data beyond standard equipment capabilities. "The Kitharan ecology minister will meet us upon landing," Veltar said. "They're quite interested in our findings, particularly as they relate to Shadow Stalker territory management." For generations, the natives of Cathara had treated Shadow Stalkers as dangers to be avoided or eliminated. The species was endangered, pushed to the fringes of its natural habitat. Jake's research offered an alternative approach, one based on communication rather than conflict. "Do you think our Academy Shadow Stalker will adapt to reintroduction?" Jake asked, thinking of the creature that had become almost a research partner over the past months. "That," Veltar said, his translator conveying dry amusement, "is what we're here to find out." The landing at Cathara's primary research outpost went smoothly. The native Catharans, tall, willowy beings with iridescent skin adapted for the planet's perpetual twilight, greeted the research team with formal politeness tinged with skepticism. "We have reviewed your publications, Professor Veltar, Mr. Harrison," said Ecology Minister Shallan, leading them toward the outpost's briefing room. "Your results with a single specimen are impressive, but Shadow Stalkers in the wild hunt in coordinated groups. They are responsible for 16 deaths in outlying settlements this season alone." "With respect, Minister," Jake said carefully, "those deaths occurred in areas where human settlement has encroached on traditional Shadow Stalker territory. The predation is defensive, not aggressive." Shallan's skin flickered with patterns that the translator interpreted as surprise. "You defend the creatures that kill my people?" "I suggest understanding them." Jake clarified. "Shadow Stalkers are intelligent enough to establish boundaries if given the opportunity. They don't want conflict any more than you do." The ecology minister's skepticism remained evident throughout the briefing, but necessity had made the Kitharans willing to try new approaches. Traditional culling and containment strategies had failed to prevent predator-settler conflicts and had pushed the Shadow Stalker population to unsustainable levels. The following morning, Jake led a small team into the twilight forests of Kithara. Unlike the carefully maintained preserve at the Academy, this was true Shadow Stalker territory, dense vegetation that never saw full daylight, complex terrain with underground cavern systems, and the eerie silence of an ecosystem where most prey species had evolved to be as quiet as their predators. "Biosigns indicate a Shadow Stalker pack approximately half a kilometer ahead," reported Quindar, whose compound eyes were enhanced with sensing technology. 3, possibly 4 individuals. Jake nodded, adjusting the specialized gear they'd developed for field studies. "Remember, no weapons. The recording equipment is our only technology. We need to appear non-threatening." Veltar's frill flattened slightly. "Non-threatening but not prey," he clarified for the Kitharan Rangers accompanying them. "Maintain the posture Jake has taught you." They moved forward slowly, deliberately making enough noise to announce their presence without seeming chaotic or panicked. Jake had learned that Shadow Stalkers, like many apex predators, were most dangerous when surprised or when they detected weakness. The forest grew denser, the ambient light dimming as the vegetation overhead thickened. Jake felt the familiar prickling awareness, the sensation of being watched by multiple predatory eyes. "They're surrounding us," one of the Kitharan Rangers whispered, skin pulsing with anxiety patterns. "Not surrounding," Jake corrected quietly. "Assessing, there's a difference." He stopped in a small clearing, signaling the others to form a loose circle facing outward. Then, following the protocol he'd developed, Jake sat down cross-legged while the others remained standing but relaxed. The minutes stretched into an hour. The Catharans shifted uncomfortably, unused to remaining in one place in Shadowstalker territory. Veltar and Quindar maintained their positions with the patience of experienced researchers. Finally, at the edge of the clearing, the air seemed to thicken and swirl. Not one but 3 Shadowstalkers materialized, their forms more substantial and somehow more primal than the Academy specimen. These were wild predators, unaccustomed to interaction with other intelligent species except as threats or prey. Remarkable. Veltar breathed, his scientific excitement briefly overcoming caution. They're displaying pack formation Omega-3. Jake remained motionless, maintaining eye contact with the central Shadowstalker, clearly the dominant member of the group. Its 6 eyes studied him with alien intelligence, assessing this strange creature that neither fled nor threatened. Slowly, deliberately, Jake raised one hand, palm outward, the gesture he and the Academy Shadowstalker had established as non-aggressive acknowledgement. The lead Shadowstalker tilted its head, 6 eyes blinking in sequence. Then, to the astonishment of the Catharan Rangers, it mirrored the gesture with one clawed limb. It's responding to the communication protocol. Quindar reported, compound eyes capturing every detail. Neural pattern recognition indicates familiarity with the signaling system. Jake allowed himself a small smile. They share information across packs. Our Academy specimen wasn't unique. The entire species has this capacity for communication. Over the next 3 weeks, the research team established contact with 4 different Shadowstalker packs. Using the communication framework developed with the Academy specimen, they began the slow process of negotiating territorial boundaries that both Catharans and Shadowstalkers could respect. It wasn't without setbacks. One session ended abruptly when a nervous ranger made a sudden movement, triggering a defensive display from the Shadowstalkers. Another pack refused contact entirely, retreating deeper into the forest. But overall, the patterns held. Given the opportunity, Shadowstalkers preferred establishing boundaries to conflict. The final phase of the expedition involved the reintroduction of the Academy Shadowstalker to its native environment. After careful preparation, including scent marking to indicate its connection to Jake's team, the creature was transported to a neutral territory between established pack ranges. "Will it remember you?" Minister Shallan asked as they prepared for the release. The Ecology Minister had joined them for this crucial phase, her initial skepticism gradually replaced by cautious interest. "Yes," Jake said confidently. "And more importantly, it will remember what it learned about interspecies communication." The transport container opened, and the Academy Shadowstalker emerged cautiously. It oriented immediately toward Jake, 6 eyes blinking in the now familiar pattern of recognition. Jake raised his hand in the established greeting. The Shadowstalker responded, then turned its attention to the surrounding forest. Its nostrils flared, taking in the sense of its home world, many likely familiar from genetic memory, despite its captive upbringing. What happened next exceeded even Jake's expectations. The Shadowstalker moved to the edge of the clearing, raised its head, and emitted a complex series of clicks and subsonic rumbles. From the forest came an answering call. "It's communicating with the wild packs," Veltar said, recording devices capturing every sound and movement, establishing its presence. Over the next 3 days, they observed as the Academy Shadowstalker navigated the complex social dynamics of wild pack integration. It used the problem-solving skills developed through Jake's puzzles to establish its value to the pack. It demonstrated the communication protocols developed at the Academy, effectively teaching the wild Shadowstalkers how to interact with the research team. It's acting as an intermediary, Jake realized, a translator between species. On the final day of the expedition, Minister Shallan joined them in the field. Witnessing firsthand as a Shadowstalker pack allowed their team to approach a den site, something previously unheard of in Catharan Shadowstalker relations. "I must admit, Mr. Harrison," the minister said as they observed the pack's complex social interactions, "your Deathworld perspective has achieved what generations of our traditional approaches could not." Jake nodded, watching as the Academy Shadowstalker, now fully integrated into the Wild Pack, maintained its special connection with the research team while thriving in its natural environment. That's the paradox of Earth's evolutionary history, he explained. Because we evolved alongside predators, sometimes as prey, sometimes as competitors, eventually as apex predators ourselves, we developed a unique capacity for interspecies understanding. We respect predators not despite being from a death world, but because of it. The research vessel Stellar Horizon departed Cathara 2 days later, leaving behind a transformed relationship between settlers and shadow stalkers. The communication protocols Jake had developed were being implemented by Catharan ranger teams throughout the Twilight Forests. Already, incidents of predator-settler conflict had decreased dramatically. As they prepared to return to Zarian Prime and the Galactic Academy, Professor Veltar found Jake on the observation deck, watching as Cathara receded into the distance. "The Chancellor has been in contact," Veltar said, his frill fully extended with excitement. "The Xenological Research Council is establishing a permanent Deathworld Studies department at the Academy. They want you to lead it after your graduation." Jake looked surprised. "Me, but I'm still completing my studies." "Your practical experience now exceeds that of most senior researchers," Veltar pointed out. "And your perspective is unique. There are only 17 human students in the entire galactic academic system, none with your particular background or demonstrated abilities." Jake thought about how far he had come from that first uncomfortable day in the xenobiology classroom. From struggling outsider to pioneer of a new field of study. From the lone human trying to fit into alien-sized furniture to a respected researcher whose Deathworld heritage had become his greatest strength. "I accept," he said, "on one condition." "Name it," Veltar responded. "The department focuses not just on predator species, but on the full spectrum of Deathworld adaptations. Earth isn't the only planet that evolved in harsh conditions. There are lessons to be learned from all challenging environments." Veltar's frill rippled with approval. "A holistic approach. The Chancellor will approve." As the Stellar Horizon entered faster-than-light travel, Jake thought about the shadow stalker that had started it all, from contained specimen to research partner to ambassador between species. It was a journey that paralleled his own. Earth was classified as a death world in galactic terminology. Its gravity was punishing. Its atmosphere contained toxic elements. Its ecology was filled with predators and pathogens and natural disasters. Humans had evolved in this crucible of challenges, emerging as a species that combined predatory intelligence with cooperative social structures. For most of the galaxy, this made humans objects of fascination and wariness. Deathworlders were respected for their resilience, but often misunderstood. Jake Harrison had shown that being from a death world wasn't something to overcome. It was a perspective to be valued. In a galaxy where most species had evolved away from danger, humanity's experience of evolving through danger offered unique wisdom. As the stars streaked past the viewport, Jake smiled. The xenobiology classroom incident that had begun as a containment failure had transformed into something much more significant, a bridge of understanding between the death worlds and the wider galaxy, one predator species at a time. And it had all started because a human student had remained calm when a shadow stalker escaped its cage.